She thought she knew every secret Elvis ever had, until his final night. In a quiet Graceland bedroom, just hours before the end, Elvis looked Priscilla in the eyes and told her the one truth he'd hidden his whole life. What he said made her collapse in tears. August 15, 1977. The Memphis night was thick with heat and memory. Crickets whispered outside Graceland's iron gates as a few fans lingered by candlelight, unaware the king inside was facing his last hours. Upstairs, only one lamp glowed, a soft pool of amber on the dresser beside a sealed envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, bold, looping, and steady. Across the front, in black ink, were 4 words. To you, Scylla. Priscilla stood by the doorway, unsure if she should step inside. Elvis sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, eyes heavy but clear. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. His body looked tired, but his mind seemed to be racing somewhere she couldn't follow. "Lisa's asleep," she said gently. He nodded without looking up. "Good. I don't want her to hear this." For a long silence, only the ticking of a wall clock filled the room. Elvis finally looked up, his blue eyes catching the lamplight. "There's something I need to say before morning." The sentence hung there, trembling in the air. Priscilla's throat tightened. "Elvis, what are you talking about?" He motioned toward the envelope. "That is for you. But I can't just leave words on paper. You deserve to hear the truth from me." She stepped closer, hearing the low hum of the air conditioner, the faint rustle of the curtains. The mansion felt alive, as if the walls themselves were listening. "Elvis, it's late. You should rest." He smiled faintly. "Rest? That's the one thing I've never learned to do." A half-empty glass of water trembled on the nightstand beside a stack of prescriptions. His reflection in the mirror looked older than his 42 years. For a moment, the great performer looked like a man still trying to figure out who he was without the stage lights. He reached out and took Priscilla's hand. His grip was warm but weak. "Scylla, before morning comes, you're going to know something I should have said years ago." She tried to speak, but the words caught. The sound of Lisa's quiet breathing drifted faintly from down the hall, a reminder of all they had built and lost. "Elvis, if this is about us, it's about everything," he interrupted, his voice low but steady. "The fame, the shows, the mistakes. You've seen the man the world wanted. You never saw the one I kept buried." Outside, thunder rolled far in the distance. He flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. He reached for the envelope. For a heartbeat, it looked like he might open it right then. But instead, he froze. His hand hovered mid-air, shaking. The seconds stretched long. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not until I find the right words." He stood and walked slowly toward the hallway. Priscilla followed him past framed photographs of concerts, family moments, a life told in flashes of glory and regret. They reached the piano room. The scent of old wood and stage polish filled the air. Elvis placed the envelope carefully on the piano lid. He looked at her again, his voice almost breaking. "Do you ever feel something clawing to get out? A truth that's been living inside you so long it starts to hurt?" Priscilla nodded softly. "Every day." He gave a sad smile. "Then you'll understand why I can't leave this world without saying mine." The old clock in the hallway struck midnight. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and for an instant, the lights flickered. Elvis glanced at the envelope one last time, then back at Priscilla. "Promise me you'll listen. All the way, no matter what I say." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. He took a deep breath. The storm outside began to swell, wind pressing against the windows like the world itself was holding its breath. He turned toward the piano bench, cracked his knuckles, and whispered, "Then let me start from the beginning." The first soft notes of unchained melody drifted through the house. And with that, Graceland went silent, waiting for the confession that would change everything. The piano keys were cool beneath Elvis's trembling fingers. Outside, rain began to patter against the wide Graceland windows, soft but steady, like a metronome counting down the final hours of a life lived too fast. The house was still. Only the faint hum of the old ceiling fan filled the air. From somewhere down the hall, Joe Esposito's voice murmured to security, unaware of the quiet storm forming behind the closed doors of the music room. Elvis pressed the first note of Unchained Melody. The sound was fragile, almost human. Each chord seemed to pull another memory out of hiding. The gold records on the wall reflected flickers of lightning, their surfaces glowing like silent witnesses. Priscilla stood at the doorway watching him play. The man at the piano wasn't the legend the world screamed for. He was smaller, older, more human. The stage lights were gone, and for the first time, she could see the truth written in his face. "Scylla," he said quietly, his voice drifting above the music. "Every song I ever sang was a confession. You just didn't hear it." She frowned softly. "What do you mean?" He looked up, eyes glassy but sharp. "When I sang Can't Help Falling in Love, I wasn't performing. I was apologizing. When I sang Love Me Tender, I was begging for something I already lost." The chord stumbled, then continued, slower. He was digging through his own history like a man reading his own obituary. A flash of thunder illuminated a photo on the piano. Their wedding, May 1st, 1967, Aladdin Hotel, Las Vegas. 200 guests, but he remembered only one. "You looked so calm that day," he said. "I thought I was marrying peace." Priscilla's voice trembled. "You were marrying chaos, Elvis. You just didn't know it yet." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Yeah. Guess you were the only one brave enough to love the chaos." The words hung there, heavy but tender. He paused, staring at his hands. The veins stood out, pulsing under thin skin. "I used to think fame would fill every empty space inside me. Turns out it only made the holes bigger." Lightning flashed again. The sound of rain deepened, like applause from the heavens. He stopped playing. For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind of silence that weighs more than noise. Then he reached into a drawer beside the piano and pulled something out. It was a small, faded photograph. The edges were soft with age. Priscilla stepped closer. The image showed a young woman, dark hair, bright smile, standing beside a guitar case in 1955. Priscilla froze. She recognized her. "Dixie Locke," she whispered. Elvis nodded. "First girl I ever sang to. Before the fame. Before you. I kept this photo all these years. Not because I loved her, but because it reminded me of who I was before the lights found me." He looked at the picture for a long time, then at Priscilla. "You ever keep something that hurts to remember, just so you don't forget who you used to be?" She swallowed hard. "Every day." He set the photo back into the drawer, almost tenderly. "I used to think losing people was the worst thing that could happen. But it's not. Forgetting why they mattered, that's worse." The rain grew heavier. The air smelled like wet wood and memory. He leaned back on the piano bench, eyes unfocused. "Do you remember that night in Palm Springs? You told me love can survive anything except lies." Priscilla nodded. "I remember." He looked at her, the edges of his mouth twitching in something like regret. "You were right." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic tap of rain on the window panes. Elvis stood and walked to the shelf near the record player. He traced his fingers along the spine of an old Bible, the one his mother, Gladys, had given him. Inside, the pages were worn from his late-night searches for peace. "Sometimes," he said almost to himself, "I think I spent my whole life looking for God in the noise." He turned back toward her. "But maybe he was always in the quiet, in the moments I was too afraid to face." The lights flickered again. A nearby flash of lightning lit up his profile, the weary face of a man who had been adored by millions, yet was terrified to be known by one. Priscilla crossed the room and stood beside him. She wanted to reach for his hand, but something in his posture held her back, as if he were still performing, even now, for ghosts no one else could see. "Elvis," she said softly, "you don't have to explain everything tonight." He shook his head. "No, Silla." "I do. Because by morning it might be too late." He opened the top drawer of the piano cabinet. Inside was a folded letter and a small brass key. He took the key and placed it on the piano beside the envelope marked to you. Scylla. What's this? She asked. That, he said, staring at it, is where the truth lives. She frowned. What do you mean? Elvis glanced toward the hallway mirror, the one beside his dressing room. Behind that mirror is a compartment. My diary's in there. Every word I never said out loud. Her breath caught. You wrote everything down? He nodded. Every show, every mistake, every prayer I didn't finish. He looked down, voice trembling now. I wrote tell her the truth. Tomorrow almost every night. But tomorrow kept running away. Thunder cracked overhead. He looked at her one last time, eyes glistening. Tomorrow's finally here, Scylla. She stared at him, frozen, feeling the air tighten around them. He slid the key across the piano toward her, the sound small but sharp, like a door unlocking somewhere deep inside both of them. And in that moment, Priscilla realized this wasn't just another restless night at Graceland. It was the start of a reckoning. The room felt smaller now, as if the air itself was listening. Elvis sat back down at the piano, but his fingers no longer moved. The song had ended, yet something much deeper was beginning. Priscilla stood still, the brass key trembling in her palm. She could hear the rain against the glass, the ticking clock, and the quiet rasp of Elvis breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Scylla, I never stopped loving you. Her eyes widened. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. But he looked up, and she saw the truth written in his face. No performance, no stage light, just raw human regret. The pills, he continued, the late nights, the tours, everyone said I was addicted to fame. But that wasn't the addiction. He exhaled, the sound trembling. The real addiction was hiding from who I was when I was with you. Priscilla took a step closer. Elvis? He raised a hand gently, asking her to let him finish. I thought I could outrun the guilt, he said. Every concert, every screaming crowd. It was like turning up the volume to drown out the silence inside. But the silence always found me again. He looked toward the gold records, their polished faces gleaming like reminders of all he'd won and everything he'd lost. Every song about heartbreak, he said quietly. They weren't about lost women. They were about you. And about Lisa. And about the family I broke while chasing something that was never real. Priscilla's voice cracked. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, he said. Because you deserve to know who I really was. He reached for a small stack of folded pages on the piano. Torn sheets covered in blue ink. These are copies from my diary, he said. The rest is still behind that mirror. Every time I thought I'd tell you the truth, I'd write the same line at the end. He unfolded one page and read aloud, his voice trembling. Tell her the truth tomorrow. Lightning flashed, bathing his face in white light. But tomorrow never came. Until now. Priscilla's breath caught in her throat. Elvis turned toward her fully, his eyes shining but steady. Do you remember when we first moved into Graceland? You told me love would be easy if I stopped pretending. You were right, but I was too proud to listen. He paused, and for a moment, his voice broke completely. I thought if I became Elvis Presley, maybe the man inside me, the scared, poor boy from Tupelo, would disappear. But he never did. And he's the one who ruined us. He looked down, his hands shaking. I told myself I'd make it right once I slowed down. But I never slowed down, did I? Priscilla knelt beside the piano bench. You did your best, Elvis. You were under pressure no one could understand. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. That's the thing. Everyone says I had everything. But what's everything worth if you can't sleep at night because the one person who really knew you can't stand to look at you anymore? Her eyes softened. I never stopped caring. He nodded slowly. I know. That's what makes it worse. The rain eased for a moment, as if giving space for the silence between them. Elvis wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You want to know the truth I've been hiding? Priscilla nodded. I never loved the stage more than you. I just didn't know how to love anything without destroying it. The confession hit like thunder. She covered her mouth, tears rising fast. Elvis? He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. I ruined a lot of good things. But you were never one of them. You were the reason I wanted to be better, even when I couldn't be. A small, fragile smile broke through his exhaustion. Every time I sang Love Me Tender, I pictured your face the night Lisa was born. That's what kept me going when the crowd stopped feeling real. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 1. Its chime echoed through the house like a slow heartbeat. Elvis looked toward the hallway mirror again. Behind that glass are years of truths I didn't have the courage to say. You'll find them all when I'm gone. He reached out and took the key from her trembling fingers. He kissed it, then pressed it back into her palm. Keep it safe, because once you open that mirror, there's no going back. Priscilla stared at the key, felt heavier than gold. Elvis, she whispered, why are you saying this now? He leaned back on the bench, eyes glistening. Because I can feel it, Scylla. The end. And I don't want to leave this world with lies still between us. The air in the room shifted. A strange calm settled in, like the storm outside had moved into the walls. He closed his eyes for a moment. All my life, people called me the king. But I was never a king. I was a boy who found a crown too heavy to carry. He looked at her one last time. I need you to forgive the man beneath it. Priscilla's tears fell freely now. I already have. Elvis smiled faintly, relief flickering across his face. Then I can finally rest. He turned back to the piano, touching one key. Just a single note, soft and trembling. It lingered in the air like a goodbye. I'll leave you the diary, he said quietly. And a letter. They'll tell you the rest. She wanted to stop him, to hold him, to promise there'd be more time. But deep down she knew there wouldn't be. He stood, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. Scylla, he whispered. Thank you for loving the man the world never met. And with that, he walked slowly toward the stairs. Priscilla stayed where she was, clutching the key, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade. When the door clicked shut behind him, the house seemed to exhale. The truth was finally free, but it had come with a cost. The storm outside had deepened, thunder rumbling low across the Memphis sky. Inside Graceland, the lights flickered as if the house itself were holding its breath. Priscilla stood alone in the music room, the brass key still warm in her hand. The piano remained open, one final note of unchained melody, humming faintly in the air like a heartbeat refusing to stop. She turned toward the hallway mirror. The glass shimmered with the reflection of lightning. Her hand trembled as she pressed the key into the hidden slot behind the frame. A click echoed, small but sharp, like a door unlocking after decades. Behind the mirror was a narrow compartment. Inside lay a small leather-bound book, edges worn, cover creased, pages yellowed. On the first page, in Elvis's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. For you, when I'm gone. She sat on the couch beside the piano, the diary resting on her lap. Rain streaked the window beside her, glowing under every flash of lightning. When she opened the book, the scent of old paper and cologne rose into the air, faint traces of a man who could fill stadiums and still feel utterly alone. The first entry was dated April 1973, Honolulu, post-show. The crowd screamed like thunder, but when I walked off stage, it was silent. I thought of her. The sound of her laugh, the way she said my name like it still meant something. Priscilla exhaled, eyes blurring. Another page. I can't sleep. The applause fades too fast. The noise outside can't hide the noise inside. Every line felt like a wound reopening. She could almost hear his voice. Gentle, broken, still trying to understand himself. Hours seemed to vanish as she turned the pages. Each entry peeled back the layers of the man the world thought they knew. I take the pills to turn my mind off. They don't work. They just make the dreams louder. I see her face every time Lisa laughs. It's like God reminding me what I lost. Maybe fame is just loneliness with a spotlight. Priscilla's hand covered her mouth as tears fell. This wasn't just confession. It was pain written in ink. Then she reached one line that stopped her cold. My heart lives in the house I can't go home to. Her breath caught. The sentence was simple, but it carried years of silence, regret, and love that never faded. She pressed the diary against her chest. "Oh, Elvis!" The rain slowed, replaced by the faint sound of cicadas outside. The storm was ending, but something heavier remained inside her. A storm of understanding. Elvis appeared in the doorway, his white robe catching the glow from the hallway. His face looked softer now, as if confessing had lightened the weight he'd carried for so long. "You found it," he said quietly. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. "I wish you'd let me find it sooner." He stepped closer, his voice low. "If I had, you might have loved me less." She looked up sharply. "That's not true." He smiled sadly. "You loved the man you believed I could be. The real one was harder to love." Lightning illuminated his profile, older, fragile, still impossibly magnetic. Priscilla closed the diary. "You think love disappears because of truth?" He shook his head. "No. I think truth makes love harder, but it makes it real." She reached out, taking his hand. For the first time in years, their fingers fit without resistance. The space between them, once filled with noise, fame, and misunderstanding, felt still. They sat together on the couch, the diary open between them. No cameras, no crowds, just two people remembering what it meant to be human. He pointed to the line she'd stopped on. "That one, about the house I can't go home to. That's my confession." Her tears came again, quiet and unstoppable. "Elvis," she whispered, "you could have always come home." He looked away. "Maybe. But sometimes you build walls so high you forget how to climb back over." Outside, dawn was beginning to break, thin gray light filtering through the rain. Priscilla rested her head against his shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect for people to love you." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I spent too long pretending I was." Thunder rumbled softly one last time, distant now. The storm was ending. Elvis exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing years of guilt. "Scylla," he said gently, "if anything happens to me, promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't let them tell our story wrong." She looked up, startled. "Why would they?" He smiled, tired but peaceful. "Because stories are easy to sell. Truth isn't." A knock came from the hallway, Joe Esposito's voice calling from behind the door. "Eh? Dr. Nick's on the line. He says he'll swing by in the morning." Elvis squeezed her hand, eyes still on her. "Morning's not far." Then, softer, "Stay a little longer?" She nodded. "As long as you need." They sat in silence, listening to the fading rain, the quiet house, the sound of two hearts remembering what it was to forgive. And somewhere between the thunder and dawn, the king of rock and roll found peace. Not in applause, but in being understood. The sky above Memphis was still bruised from the night before. A thin gray light crept over the gates of Graceland, catching on the rain-soaked leaves and the white stone lions standing guard. Outside, a few early fans waited with flowers, unaware that history was about to stop breathing. Inside the mansion, the world was quiet. Too quiet. It was 8:57 a.m. when Joe Esposito knocked on Elvis's door. No answer. At 9:10 he called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. By 9:27, the hallway erupted into panic. Priscilla heard the shouting before she understood the words. She ran upstairs, her robe trailing behind her. Two paramedics were already rushing past the gold record wall, their shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The sound of their equipment cases echoed like gunfire. Lisa Marie's cry came from behind her, frightened and confused. "Mama, what's happening?" Priscilla turned just long enough to say, "Stay with Grandma," before racing toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. And there, on the cool white tile, surrounded by silence and chaos, lay Elvis Aaron Presley. For a moment, she couldn't move. The air left her lungs. The scene blurred. The flash of the paramedics' gloves, the murmur of CPR counts, the shaking hands of people who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Someone was shouting for Dr. Nick. Someone else was praying under their breath. But all Priscilla could see was his face, calm, almost peaceful, as if he were just asleep after a long tour. The brass key was still in her pocket. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles white. Minutes later, the house fell into an impossible stillness. One of the medics stood, eyes heavy, and gave a small shake of his head. Time stopped. The walls of Graceland, the laughter, the music, the love, the pain, seemed to collapse inward. Priscilla covered her mouth, but the sob escaped anyway. The sound echoed through the hall, through the house, through the years. Hours later, the police had come and gone. Reporters were already gathering outside the gates, their cameras hungry for the story the world didn't yet know. In the bedroom, sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, cutting across the dresser. On top of it, still untouched, was the sealed envelope marked to you, Scylla. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The paper felt warm, like it had been waiting. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the same bed where he'd spoken his final words to her just hours earlier, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, folded twice. His handwriting was uneven this time, the ink darker at the edges where the pen had pressed harder. She began to read. Scylla, if you're reading this, I didn't get to finish saying everything. But you were right, truth is the only way love survives. I spent my life singing about love, but I didn't understand it until the night you forgave me. You once told me you could love me through anything. I never believed that until now. I hid behind the music because I thought love would make me weak. I see now it was the only thing that ever made me strong. Tell Lisa her daddy loved her more than he loved the music. Tell her I finally found peace. If love survives the truth, it was real. Her vision blurred. She clutched the page to her chest and whispered, "It was." For a long time, she sat there, the letter pressed to her heart, her tears falling onto the ink until the words smudged into tiny rivers. Outside, the news broke. Radios across America interrupted their morning shows. Televisions flickered with headlines. Elvis Presley dead at 42. Crowds began forming at the gates of Graceland within the hour. Some brought flowers, others just stood there, silent, unable to believe it was true. Inside, Priscilla moved like a shadow through the mansion. She touched the piano, the leather chair where he wrote, the Bible still open to Psalms. And then she saw the diary, the one she'd read with him just before dawn. She opened it again, this time turning to the very last page. A fresh line had been written in blue ink, probably just hours before his death. Tomorrow came too soon. But I'm ready to go home now. Priscilla closed the book and held it to her chest. You are home, Elvis, she whispered. The sound of voices drifted from outside. Fans singing Can't Help Falling in Love. Thousands of them, their voices trembling, turning grief into a hymn. For the first time since he'd passed, she smiled. He would have loved that, his people singing him home. Years later, when the world tried to rewrite their story, the tabloids, the documentaries, the gossip, Priscilla remembered his last words. Don't let them tell our story wrong. So she didn't. In 1978, she founded the Elvis Legacy Foundation, an organization to help struggling musicians battle addiction and loneliness. Its slogan came from his final letter. If love survives the truth, it was real. She used his diaries to inspire her speeches, reading excerpts to remind the world that Elvis Presley was more than the king. He was a man who made mistakes, who carried guilt, but who died trying to make peace with the people he loved most. Over time, the pain softened. Lisa grew older, the fans kept coming, and every August, candles still flickered outside Graceland's gates. One summer evening, many years later, Priscilla returned to the piano room. The leather diary sat on the shelf, beside the photo of Elvis smiling on stage. She sat down at the same piano bench, the same place where he'd played his final song. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and quietly, almost as if afraid to disturb the air, she began to play Love Me Tender. The notes were uneven, trembling, but beautiful. As she played, she looked up at the ceiling, at the place where his voice had once filled the room, and whispered, "You kept your promise. You told the truth." A tear slid down her cheek, But she didn't stop playing. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. The candlelight from the fans outside flickered against the windows. It looked like the whole world was glowing for him one last time. And for the first time in decades, Priscilla felt peace. Not because he was gone, but because he'd finally been heard. Years passed, but Graceland never slept. Each August, candles lined the walkway like stars fallen to earth. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder in the quiet Memphis night, whispering prayers, singing softly. Not for the king of rock and roll, but for the man they never really knew. Inside, the piano room stayed exactly as he'd left it. The gold records glimmered on the walls, but it was the worn leather diary on the shelf that drew every eye. Visitors said the air there felt different, heavier, gentler, alive with something you couldn't name. Priscilla often sat by the window, watching the crowds gather. She never spoke at the vigils, never made grand speeches. She just listened, to the stories, the laughter, the tears, to the people who said his songs had saved them from their own loneliness. And sometimes, when the last fan had gone and the candles burned low, she'd whisper to the empty room, "They finally see you, Elvis. All of you. It wasn't the fame that lasted. Not the headlines or the records. What survived were the words he'd written in that letter. If love survives the truth, it was real." She built her life around that sentence. So did the foundation she created in his name. Every time it helped a struggling musician find hope again, she felt him close. Not as the legend the world adored, but as the man who'd finally learned to tell the truth before it was too late. One night, long after the house had gone dark, she walked into the music room again. The diary sat open on the piano. The last page was blank, a single clean space waiting for closure. She picked up his old fountain pen, the same one he used to sign autographs and write his secret confessions. Slowly, she wrote, "You kept your promise. The world heard your truth, and love survived." Her hand trembled, but her heart felt light. For a moment, she could almost hear him, that deep, familiar voice floating through the quiet, whispering the words he'd once said in his final hour. "Don't let them tell our story wrong." She smiled through tears. "They won't," she whispered back. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying faint echoes of "Love Me Tender" from a nearby radio. The melody drifted through the night, soft and eternal, as if Elvis himself was still singing his confession into the world. Not from a stage, but from somewhere far kinder. Because in the end, his greatest performance wasn't a concert. It was honesty. He'd spent a lifetime searching for love and applause, only to find it in forgiveness. And maybe that's what made him timeless. Not the crown, not the fame, but the courage to be human one last time. Sometimes the bravest thing a legend can do isn't sing louder. It's speak the truth quietly. If the story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because behind every legend is a human heart. And sometimes, telling the truth is the most powerful song of all. Did you ever forgive someone too late? Tell us your story below.